Welcome to this explainer. Okay, let's just dive right into a really fascinating paradox we have today, all about active listening and the actual science of conversational timing. We're going to explore this phenomenon that literally happens thousands of times a day in your life. You probably don't even notice it, but it completely dictates how competent, honest, and likable you appear to the people around you.
So think about the classic business advice you've been taught regarding how long you should wait to speak, and just hold that thought for a second. You know the exact advice I'm talking about, right? Basically, every corporate communication seminar and active listening workshop tells you the same thing. Take a deep breath, wait 3 full seconds after the other person finishes speaking, and then respond. The idea is that it's supposed to show you're thoughtful, empathetic, and truly listening to them. Well, as it turns out, the latest psycholinguistic data suggests that if you just blindly apply this rule, you might actually be destroying your conversational connections.
Because what's really interesting here is how directly that traditional corporate advice completely clashes with our actual human biological wiring. You have this textbook 3-second rule going up against the real biological speed of a human conversational transition, and there is just a massive gap between the two. Understanding that gap is absolutely crucial to mastering how you communicate.
Our biological baseline is actually astounding. The typical gap between turns in an English conversation is a lightning-fast 200 to 240 milliseconds. To put that into perspective, the blink of an eye takes about 300 milliseconds, so we are regularly responding faster than a literal blink. Psycholinguists actually consider this a profound cognitive puzzle, mostly because it takes our brain anywhere from 600 to 1500 milliseconds just to formulate a single word. So how on earth are we responding in a fraction of that time?
Well, the secret is predictive comprehension. Essentially, we are predicting what our partner is going to say before they even finish their sentence. And this rapid transition serves as a very honest biological signal of social connection and alignment. We're overlapping our cognitive processing with their speaking. When two people get highly aligned like this synchronization is known as clicking. It's a biological marker of rapport. When you click, that tiny 200 millisecond gap signals to the other person, hey, I am completely with you, we are on the exact same wavelength.
Section 1. The penalty of pausing. Let's see what happens when we start messing with that rhythm.
The crucial point here is that a mere 4-second disruption in conversational flow makes us feel social rejection, distress, and even lowered self-esteem. Researchers did this amazing study where they had participants watch a video of a group discussion. In one version, the conversation just flowed naturally, but in the other, they sneakily edited in a single 4-second silence right after a statement. The viewers who watched that delayed version reported a massive drop in feelings of belonging and social validation. And honestly, the craziest part? The viewers didn't even consciously notice the edit. Our brains are just hardwired to interpret a break in conversational flow as a literal cue of social exclusion.
And it gets worse. Enter the slow lie effect. This proves that when you pause before answering, listeners naturally just assume you're fabricating a deceptive response. Across 14 different experiments, researchers found that if you delay your response, people inherently think you're lying. We have this built-in lay theory that an immediate answer is an unedited, honest thought. If you pause, the listener subconsciously thinks, why are they hesitating? What are they trying to hide?
So in an unstructured conversation, forcing that 3-second delay actually destroys your perceived competence and your willingness to help. Think about it. If a colleague asks you for a favor, like, hey, can you help me with this report, and you pause for 2 full seconds before saying sure, they definitely don't think you're being thoughtful. They think you are begrudgingly complying. They interpret that pause as an internal conflict, like you really wanted to say no, but you forced yourself to say yes. It lowers your perceived confidence, it makes you look unknowledgeable, and if you happen to be speaking with a stranger, it just creates severe anxiety and awkwardness.
Section 2. Strategic silence, the exceptions. Now wait a minute, because there are some rare, powerful exceptions where silence actually is golden.
Let's start with high-stakes business negotiations. A calculated pause in a bilateral negotiation actually shifts the parties from competitive reactions right into creative, value-creating problem-solving. Studies out of MIT looked at employment compensation negotiations, and they found that naturally occurring silences of at least 3 seconds directly preceded major breakthroughs. That extended pause interrupts that emotional zero-sum, fixed-pie reflex we all get, and it forces both parties into a deeply deliberative, analytical mindset. Actually, instructing negotiators to deliberately use a 3-second silence is statistically more effective for creating joint value than explicitly telling them to just problem-solve.
However, you have to be careful because this is bounded by a massive status asymmetry effect. If you are a job candidate, meaning you're the lower status party in the room, and you drop a heavy 3-second pause on the hiring manager, it completely backfires. Instead of fostering deep reflection, the candidate just gets incredibly uncomfortable and fixated on the awkwardness. So the power of the pause in a negotiation belongs primarily to the person holding the higher status.
Section 3. Unburying empathy in medicine. This introduces another huge, literal life-or-death exception: pediatric intensive care units.
In clinical settings, we see a really stark contrast between doctors who bury their empathy with immediate medical jargon versus those who leave space for the emotion to actually land. Researchers analyzed recordings of critical care physicians talking with families who are facing horrific medical decisions. A staggering 95% of the time, doctors would offer a very supportive, empathetic statement, but then immediately rush right back into technical medical explanations. They didn't leave a pause, they buried the empathy. The family couldn't even process the support because their cognitive load was instantly hijacked by medical jargon. But a few doctors used what's called unburied empathy. They said the supportive statement, and then they stayed completely silent for 3 seconds.
And the result? Families are a staggering 18 times more likely to disclose deep fears when doctors use that post-empathetic 3-second pause. 18 times! That is literally the difference between a family completely shutting down and a family opening up to share critical diagnostic information and their true long-term goals for their child's care. When you want to convey deep empathy, the silence following your statement acts as a container. It holds the space for the other person to feel truly heard.
Section 4. Rhythm over rules. Okay, so we aren't always in a medical crisis, and we aren't always in a boardroom negotiation. So how do we use this?
To be perceived as highly collaborative in everyday life, you have to avoid between-turn delays, and instead use brief pauses while you are speaking to invite your listener to engage. So if your colleague finishes speaking and you pause for 3 seconds, that's a between-turn delay. That triggers the slow lie effect and feels like rejection. But if you are the one currently speaking and you take a brief 1 or 2 second pause right mid-sentence, that is a within-turn pause. And what happens? The listener instinctively fills that little vacuum with a verbal assent, like yeah or aha. Because they hear themselves agreeing with you out loud, their brain uses self-perception theory to conclude, wow, I must really align with this person. They are incredibly helpful and collaborative.
So let's synthesize this into a bit of a cheat sheet. We absolutely must abandon the blanket rule of counting to 3 and instead match our silence to the specific conversational setting. There's just no one-size-fits-all answer. If you're grabbing coffee with a coworker or meeting a stranger, keep those transitions under a second to build that clicking rapport. If you're the boss in a tough negotiation, deploy a 3 to 9 second pause to force some creative problem solving. And if someone just shared something deeply vulnerable with you, give them 3 full seconds of silence so your empathy actually registers.
So, as you head into your next meeting, I want you to ask yourself, are you truly clicking with your listener, or are you just letting the clock ruin the connection? Because the timing of our words speaks just as loudly as the words themselves. It's time to stop mechanically counting to 3 in your head and start listening to the actual rhythm of the human being sitting right across from you. Master the timing, and for sure, you master the connection.